My name is Amara Benson. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought a single sentence from my younger sister could cut deeper than any argument, any fight, or any disappointment I'd endured in my life. But there I was, standing in my living room, phone in hand, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it could shatter my ribcage. I had just received her message. My younger sister, Layla, age 28, whom I had loved, nurtured, and defended my entire life, wrote, "Your child isn't important enough to attend my child's graduation." I read it again and again, hoping that maybe my eyes were deceiving me, that perhaps the words were meant for someone else, a cruel mistake. But no, each time the coldness of her statement hit me like a hammer. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and for a moment I felt entirely hollow inside. How could she say something like this about my little boy, my world, my everything? I put the phone down, trembling, and stared at the framed photos on my wall. There he was, my son, Ethan, with his tiny graduation cap from preschool, smiling at the camera, oblivious to the cruelty of the world, as if he already knew he was loved enough to thrive regardless of who showed up or who didn't. And yet, my sister's words lingered like a poisonous fog. She wasn't just excluding him, she was attacking me, the mother, the sister, the family member who had always bent over backward for her. The betrayal wasn't just in the message, it was in the intent, the premeditated cruelty. This wasn't a passive omission, this was a declaration. We weren't worthy of her celebration. Before I could even process the shock, I felt my emotions swing wildly. Anger, confusion, grief, and disbelief all tangled together. I wanted to call her, scream, demand an explanation, but something inside me told me to stop, to breathe, to remember that reacting in the heat of betrayal often leaves more scars than silence. But silence didn't feel like an option either, not when this was about my child. The thought of Ethan sitting at home, maybe sensing something was wrong, maybe feeling unworthy like his aunt had implied, made my heart ache even more. I poured myself a glass of water, but I couldn't drink. My hands shook, my mind raced, and I thought about all the years we had spent growing up together in our small, suburban town just outside Chicago. Layla had always been the golden child in our family, the one who charmed our parents effortlessly, the one whose mistakes were forgiven with ease, while mine were cataloged and remembered as life lessons I had to carry alone. I remember our childhood vividly, how she could cry on cue getting any toy or treat she wanted, while I learned early that life was about waiting, enduring, and making do with less. And somehow I had internalized it, thinking maybe one day she would see me differently, appreciate me, and love me as a sister should. But that day had clearly not come. My mind drifted back to the last family dinner 3 months ago at our parents' house. I had arrived with Ethan, dressed neatly, excited to share his little achievements with the family. I had baked his favorite cupcakes, packed a small gift for Layla's son Miles, and even rehearsed what I would say to her, because yes, I had been walking on eggshells for years, careful not to provoke her jealousy or irritate her perfectionist tendencies. And yet, even then, I felt her eyes on me, calculating, assessing, and measuring my worth against hers. The small remarks she made, subtle jabs about my career, my messy house, my lack of ambition, they all replayed in my mind like a slow-burning film. At the time, I brushed them off as her quirks, her insecurities. But now, seeing this message, I realized it had been building towards something far more sinister. I remembered trying to defend Ethan during that dinner when Miles accidentally knocked over his cup of juice. Layla laughed, lightly at first, but there was that sharp edge beneath the laughter, the one I had felt all my life. She didn't care about Ethan's feelings. She didn't care about mine. That was always her way. Her world revolved around her happiness, her achievements, and her perception of superiority. And now she had drawn a line so clearly, so cruelly, that even my parents couldn't erase it. I could hear my mother's voice in my head, always the peacemaker. Layla just wants the best, Amara. She doesn't mean it that way. But I couldn't accept that anymore. This wasn't a matter of misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was betrayal. My phone buzzed again, another message from her. My hands shook as I opened it. It read, "Don't bother asking why. We're happy to celebrate, but your presence isn't needed. I hope you understand." I felt my stomach drop. The audacity, the arrogance, the calculated cruelty. I wanted to reply with fire, to lash out, to remind her of all the times I had been there for her, defended her, sacrificed for her. But I didn't. I didn't because, deep down, I knew that replying in anger would only fuel the fire. No, I needed a strategy. I needed clarity. I needed to understand how someone I loved so deeply could turn their heart so completely against me. As I sat there, drowning in disbelief, I realized that this wasn't just about a graduation. It was about recognition, respect, and validation. It was about being seen and valued in the family that had always favored her. It was about breaking the cycle of favoritism and standing up for myself, for Ethan, and for the principle that love shouldn't come with conditions. My mind raced with questions. Why now? Why this? Was it always this way? Did our parents even see the injustice? Or had they too been blinded by Layla's charm? I decided I couldn't be consumed by the pain alone. I reached for my journal, my safe place for thoughts and emotions I couldn't yet voice aloud. I began writing, each word spilling out in a mixture of anguish and determination. She has crossed a line. She has insulted me, humiliated me, and cast my son aside as if he is invisible. But I am not powerless. I will not let her define our worth. I will find a way to confront this, to reclaim our dignity, and to make her understand that love and respect cannot be commanded. They must be earned and reciprocated. Writing calmed me slightly, gave me a sense of control in a world that suddenly felt chaotic and cruel. But as the adrenaline faded, exhaustion set in. I sank into the couch, holding Ethan close as he napped beside me, and felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Was I overreacting? Was I reading too much into her words? But then I looked at my child's peaceful face, his small chest rising and falling with each breath, and I knew. I wasn't overreacting. No one had the right to diminish him, to decide he wasn't important. Not her. Not anyone. And if standing up for him meant confronting the woman I once loved as a sister, then so be it. I would do it. The night stretched on. I couldn't sleep. I thought about what steps to take, about whether I should speak to our parents or go directly to Layla. And then, just as I was gathering my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. Not from her this time, but from my best friend, Tasha, who had been with me through everything. Her message was simple. "Amara, I just saw Layla's post. You need to see this." My stomach churned as I opened it. There it was, Layla's social media post, a photo of Miles, all smiles and confetti with the caption, "So proud of my little genius. Couldn't imagine celebrating without our closest family." My eyes narrowed, my chest tightened. The betrayal cut deeper now because I realized something shocking. She had invited everyone else, everyone except me and Ethan, painting it as if our absence was a mutual choice, a graceful decision. She had manipulated the narrative, controlled the story, and humiliated us publicly without a second thought. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not with anger, but with clarity. I would no longer be silent. I would no longer let her dictate our worth. But how could I confront someone who had perfected deception, someone who could twist the truth so effortlessly, someone who could betray me and make it seem justified? I didn't know yet. All I knew was that this was far from over, and the coming days would reveal more than I was ready for. The truth behind Layla's cruelty, the reason she felt entitled to diminish my son, and the secret she had been hiding for years were about to come to light, and I would be at the center of it. As I sat on my couch that night, staring at Layla's smiling face on social media, I couldn't help but replay the entire history of our relationship in my mind. Sometimes betrayal doesn't start with one cruel message. It begins long before you even realize it, woven into the fabric of childhood, stitched together by jealousy, favoritism, and quiet manipulation. I remembered the first time I truly noticed it, though at the time I didn't understand what I was feeling. I was 9 years old and Layla was 6. I had brought home my report card with a perfect score in spelling, and I ran to show our parents proudly. They congratulated me politely, a smile on my father's face, a nod from my mother, and then Layla entered the room with tears in her eyes because she hadn't finished her art project. Suddenly, the attention shifted entirely to her, her cries, her frustrations. My accomplishments were acknowledged, yes, but quickly pushed aside, replaced by her needs, her wants, her feelings. That moment, small as it seemed then, planted the first seed of my understanding. In our family, Layla always came first. I grew up trying to be careful around her, trying not to overshadow her, trying to be the good sister who never made waves. I took on responsibilities early, babysat her when our parents were busy, helped her with homework, even stood up for her in school when other kids teased her. I thought love was about sacrifice, about giving without expecting anything in return. I thought loyalty meant hiding my feelings so as not to hurt hers. But as I learned later, loyalty is one thing, blind loyalty is another, and I had given her the latter without realizing it. High school brought no relief. Layla was socially magnetic, effortlessly drawing attention, friends, and praise. I was quieter, studious, and focused, and while I had friends who loved me, I often felt like an accessory to her life rather than a part of it. I remember vividly the night of my high school graduation. Our parents were proud, yes, but the house buzzed more for Layla's upcoming dance recital than for my achievement. I smiled, held back the sting, and congratulated her on how excited she was, because that's what I always did. Made her happiness more important than mine. In looking back, that constant shadow of her success and charm created cracks in my sense of self-worth that never fully healed. When I became a mother at 28, I thought some things might change. I imagined that love for my child would be different, undeniable, unquestionable. I wanted to show Ethan a family where everyone celebrated each other equally, where victories were acknowledged, and where he would feel safe and loved. But Layla had already demonstrated patterns that were hard to ignore. Even before her cruel message, subtle jabs had crept in. During family gatherings, she would comment on Ethan's milestones with a faint condescension. "Oh, that's cute," as if to minimize it. She would make comparisons to Miles. "He started reading at 3, you know. Isn't that impressive?" And though I tried to shrug it off, it left tiny bruises on my confidence as a mother. Layla had always been competitive in the most insidious ways, disguising envy as concern, manipulation as advice. I remember one particularly painful incident when Ethan was just 2. He had won a small art contest at his preschool, and I excitedly shared the news with her. Her response was so subtle, I almost didn't notice it at first. "Oh, that's nice, I guess. You know, Miles was doing stuff like that last year, but okay." A casual comparison, a casual undermining. But it struck me deeply. I tried to laugh it off, to pretend it didn't matter, but that was the thing. She always found a way to make her achievements seem larger, brighter, more significant, while ours felt small, insufficient, unworthy. The more I reflected, the more I realized that this latest betrayal, the graduation message, was part of a long, carefully cultivated pattern. It wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a culmination of years of subtle cruelty and favoritism, magnified by her self-perceived superiority. She had perfected the art of making others feel unimportant, and in her mind, perhaps that justified the exclusion. Perhaps she genuinely believed Ethan wasn't important enough. I found myself remembering the last argument we had 6 months ago, which had seemed trivial at the time, but now took on new meaning. We had disagreed over a birthday party for Miles. I had suggested including Ethan in the games, the cake, and the family photos. Layla had responded with a look I'll never forget, one that combined irritation, disbelief, and a kind of cold calculation. Ethan's presence isn't necessary, she had said. This is about my child. Let's not complicate things. I have been stunned, hurt, and walked away in silence, thinking perhaps I was overreacting. Now I knew. She had been testing boundaries, learning how far she could go, seeing how much she could control, and she had succeeded. That night, after scrolling through her social media posts showing Miles's graduation celebration, I felt a wave of anger and humiliation that made me want to scream. My parents had not commented publicly. My father, always the quiet peacemaker, had simply liked the photo. My mother had written a brief congratulatory comment, nothing more. I realized then that my parents, though loving, had never been able to see the depth of Layla's manipulation. They had been blinded by her charm for years, and now they were unknowingly complicit in this public humiliation. But it wasn't just my parents I worried about. It was the extended family, our friends, even neighbors. In a small town like ours, word spreads quickly. And there it was, in the public eye, a subtle but cruel message. We were not welcome. We were not worthy. Ethan, my little boy, my pride and joy, had been declared invisible. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about a graduation ceremony. This was about power, control, and image. Layla had always been the golden child, and now she had cemented that role by showing publicly who was important and who wasn't. I tried to push back against the rising tide of anger with reason. I reminded myself that my focus needed to be Ethan, that my love for him was what mattered most, that no cruel words or calculated social maneuvering could diminish his worth or mine. But even with that clarity, the feeling of being trapped in a cycle of familial manipulation made me feel helpless, small, and exposed. I was seeing the depth of Layla's cunning for the first time, not just in one cruel message, but in years of emotional maneuvering. And I realized with a sinking feeling that confronting her would be far more complicated than I had imagined. The next day, I decided to revisit the past more deliberately, to understand where things had gone so wrong. I pulled out old photo albums, digging through pictures of childhood birthdays, school events, and holidays. There they were, my smiling face slightly in the background, Layla front and center, always receiving more attention, more praise, more celebration. I found a photo of my 9th birthday, my carefully drawn birthday cake, my tiny hands holding candles, and behind me, Layla smiling, holding a gift she had received the same day, looking radiant. The contrast was stark, almost cruel in hindsight. Even back then, I had been sidelined, made to feel as though my joy was secondary, my achievements less noteworthy, my presence less significant. And then, as if the universe wanted to test me further, I stumbled across a letter I had written to my parents when I was 12. In it, I poured out my frustration about being constantly compared to Layla, about feeling invisible, about wishing they could see me for who I was. My handwriting, jagged and uneven, held a mix of hope and hurt. Reading it now, 20 years later, made my heart ache. I had been seeking recognition, seeking validation, seeking a sense of belonging that had always been conditional. And now, as a mother myself, I felt the same sting all over again, not from strangers, but from my own sister. As I closed the album, I realized I had a choice. I could let this continue, letting Layla dictate the narrative, letting her cruelty define our self-worth, letting Ethan grow up sensing that he wasn't enough. Or I could stand up, confront the past, and reclaim our dignity. But how? How do you confront someone who has spent a lifetime perfecting deception, who can twist every truth, who can manipulate the emotions of everyone around them to their advantage? That question haunted me as I prepared for what was to come. Later that evening, I received an unexpected call from Tasha. Her voice was urgent, almost trembling. "Amara, I've been digging. There's more going on than you know. Layla's hiding things, financial stuff, manipulation with our parents, the way she's been controlling family events. It's worse than just the graduation. You need to see this." My stomach twisted. My mind raced. What could she possibly be hiding? And why was she only revealing it to me now? I felt a mix of dread and curiosity, knowing instinctively that this was a turning point. The past was catching up to the present, and the web of manipulation that had defined my life with Layla was about to unravel in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I hung up the phone, heart pounding, mind spinning. The betrayal of yesterday's message was only the tip of the iceberg. The truth beneath it, the history, the secrets, the jealousy, the hidden motives, was waiting to surface. And I knew one thing with certainty: the confrontation I had been dreading for years was inevitable. But what I didn't know was how far Layla was willing to go to maintain her control, and how deeply she had embedded herself into the hearts and minds of everyone around us. That night, I held Ethan close, watching him sleep, and promised silently, fiercely, that no one, not Layla, not anyone else, would ever make him feel unworthy again. I didn't know what the next days would bring, but I knew this. The past had shaped us, yes, but it would not define us. Not if I could help it. And yet, as I drifted into a restless sleep, a message notification lit up my phone again. It wasn't from Layla. It was an anonymous number. And the message read, "If you think you know the truth about Layla, think again. Some things are better left buried." A chill ran down my spine. The past was coming alive, and the shadows I thought I had left behind were reaching out to pull me into a storm I wasn't yet ready to face. The following week felt like walking through a storm with no umbrella. Every call, every message, every casual remark from family and friends seemed to echo Layla's betrayal. I felt exposed, fragile, and angry all at once. Tasha had insisted I meet her at a small cafe across town, a neutral place where we could talk freely. As I drove through the quiet suburban streets, memories of my childhood, my fights with Layla, and her subtle manipulations replayed like a looping film in my mind. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to center myself. Ethan was with my parents for the day, and I was grateful. I needed this meeting alone. Tasha was already there when I arrived, hunched over her coffee with an intensity in her eyes that made my stomach twist. As I slid into the seat opposite her, she leaned forward and whispered, "Amara, it's worse than you think. I've been going through some old family records, emails, even financial stuff. Layla, she's been manipulating things behind the scenes for years. She's controlling who gets invited to events, how our parents spend money, even how certain family decisions are made. She's created this perfect image of herself while isolating everyone else." I stared at her, feeling my anger swell. Part of me wanted to scream at Tasha for revealing all this, but mostly I felt vindicated. The message, the social media post, the cruelty, it wasn't random, it was calculated. Every jab, every exclusion, every subtle humiliation was intentional. Tasha slid a folder across the table. Inside were emails from our parents, carefully hidden notes Layla had sent, and even a scanned letter from a family lawyer she had consulted to manage family assets. The evidence was meticulous. There were instructions to our parents about who to invite to events, notes about keeping Amara in check so she wouldn't overstep, and even suggestions for which milestones were worth public attention. Reading through the documents, I felt a cocktail of emotions: rage, grief, betrayal, and a strange sense of liberation. This was the proof I had needed for years. Layla's cruelty wasn't imagination. It wasn't a result of my sensitivity. It was real, deliberate, and deeply ingrained. I remembered the day Ethan was born and how I had invited Layla to visit us in the hospital. She had come, yes, but spent more time fussing over her own appearance, taking selfies with our parents, than actually celebrating the new life in front of her. At the time, I had laughed it off, thinking she was just herself. But now, looking at the evidence, I realized it had been her first subtle attempt to assert dominance. She could participate, yes, but only on her terms, only in ways that reinforced her power. My presence, Ethan's presence, our joy, it didn't matter unless it fit her narrative. The shock and pain of years of manipulation hit me all at once. I had always tried to be the peacemaker, the mediator, the sister who loved unconditionally. But unconditional love, I realized bitterly, does not shield you from cruelty or jealousy. Sometimes it only exposes you. And Layla, with all her charm and cunning, had been exploiting that for decades. I left the cafe that day with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I knew confrontation was inevitable, but I also knew I needed strategy. I couldn't just walk into a family gathering and demand justice. Layla was too clever for that. Instead, I began documenting everything: messages, posts, old emails, even casual conversations I had overheard or remembered. I was building my case, not just for Ethan, but for myself, for my dignity, and for the truth to finally see the light of day. That evening, I received another message from Layla. I hesitated before opening it, a mixture of dread and curiosity tightening my chest. It was short, dismissive. "I hear you've been digging around. Don't bother. You'll find nothing. Some things are better left alone." My hands shook, but instead of fear, I felt a spark of defiance. She thought she could intimidate me, silence me, and manipulate the narrative once more. But she had underestimated me. I would not be pushed into silence. A few days later, I decided to attend a small family gathering, ostensibly casual, but really to observe and gather information. Layla, of course, was the center of attention. She moved through the room with her usual grace, smiling, laughing, ensuring every eye was on her and every word reinforced her perfect image. I noticed the subtle glances exchanged with my parents, the whispered suggestions, the way she subtly undermined anyone who dared speak up. I realized with horror that she had been doing this for years, not just with me, but with anyone she perceived as a threat. And then the twist came. While standing near the kitchen, I overheard a conversation between Layla and my father that froze me in place. "Don't worry," she said, her voice calm, almost sweet. "Amara will never figure out the trust fund distribution. She doesn't need to know yet. It's better this way. Keeps her in her place." My stomach dropped. Trust fund? Distribution? Everything clicked. The subtle control, the exclusions, the public humiliations. Layla wasn't just protecting Miles. She was ensuring her position as the favored child, securing power and influence over our family's wealth. This was beyond sibling rivalry. This was manipulation with calculated greed and control. I felt my knees weaken, but I didn't leave. Instead, I quietly retreated to a corner, heart hammering, and pulled out my phone. I knew now that confrontation couldn't wait. I needed evidence, witnesses, and clarity. And so I began recording, capturing snippets of conversations, observing interactions, and piecing together the full extent of Layla's deception. Every revelation deepened my hurt, but also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. I was fighting for justice, for truth, for Ethan, and for myself. The days turned into a tense battle of observation and preparation. I confronted Layla indirectly through questions, challenging her subtly about events, invitations, and decisions. She deflected every time, smiled when she lied, and played the victim whenever I pressed too hard. But I began noticing cracks, subtle slips in her narrative, inconsistencies that could be used later to expose her. And then, one night, the ultimate betrayal surfaced. I received an anonymous tip via email. The sender claimed to have copies of conversations between Layla and a family attorney detailing her plans to exclude me and Ethan from all future family events, effectively erasing our presence. The documents included manipulated letters, falsified attendance lists, and even notes suggesting ways to minimize Amara's influence. I stared at the screen, heart racing. The truth was undeniable, terrifying and empowering all at once. Layla's betrayal was complete, and now I had proof. But just as I thought I could breathe, another email arrived. This one addressed to the whole family, including me. The subject line read, "Family decisions and celebrations. Important update." My hands trembled as I opened it. Layla had drafted a message, making it appear as if my absence from Miles's graduation was my own choice, that I had decided not to participate, while simultaneously outlining future family events where I would be deliberately excluded. She had twisted reality, manipulated perceptions, and publicly humiliated me, all while presenting herself as the loving, considerate sister. My chest tightened. She had played everyone, even my parents. I felt the rage rise, hot and suffocating, and the tears followed, sudden and unrestrained. Years of sacrifice, patience, and loyalty had been met with deception, manipulation, and cruelty. But then, amid the storm of emotions, I felt clarity. This was not just a battle of sibling rivalry. This was a battle for truth, for justice, for the integrity of our family, and for the future of my son. And I realized I had no choice but to confront Layla, to lay everything bare, and to reclaim the dignity and respect that had been denied to me for too long. That night, I stood in my living room, Ethan asleep in his bed, Tasha's words echoing in my mind. The truth will come out. Be ready. I knew that the confrontation was coming, that the battle lines had been drawn, and that nothing would ever be the same again. But I also knew that I couldn't approach this lightly. Layla was cunning, manipulative, and ruthless. The coming days would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, and as I read her latest social media post, Miles beaming in a perfect graduation photo, surrounded by friends and family, I felt the weight of all she had done. But I also felt a flicker of determination, because one thing was certain: no amount of manipulation, cruelty, or deception could erase the bond I had with my child, nor the truth I had uncovered. The next move was mine, and I intended to play it carefully, strategically, and decisively. But just as I was about to draft my first move, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message appeared. Be careful. Layla isn't who you think she is. Some secrets will shock you. Prepare yourself. I froze. My pulse quickened. I had uncovered much already, but this hinted at something darker, something deeper, something that could change everything I thought I knew about my sister, our family, and the hidden motives behind every calculated act of betrayal. I knew then that the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The day finally came when I could no longer wait. Every fiber of my being, the anger, the hurt, the years of subtle humiliation, and now the concrete proof of Layla's manipulation, demanded that I confront her. I remember standing outside her house that morning, the crisp suburban air doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. Ethan was with my parents, safe for now, and I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. I knew this confrontation would change everything, either break us apart irreparably or finally expose the truth for all to see. I took a deep breath, adjusted my jacket, and knocked on the door. Layla answered with her usual smile, radiant and disarming, the kind that had allowed her to manipulate so many people so effortlessly. "Amara, what a surprise," she said, her tone sweet but faintly guarded, as if she could sense the storm brewing behind my eyes. I stepped in, ignoring her attempt at charm. "Layla, we need to talk," I said firmly. Her smile faltered just slightly, the first crack in her flawless mask. We sat down in the living room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I opened the folder I had prepared, the emails, the letters, the evidence of her exclusionary plans and manipulations. "Layla, I know everything," I said quietly but firmly. "The graduation, the family events, the trust fund letters, everything." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw panic, but she quickly masked it with her usual calm. "Amara, I don't know what you mean," she said, almost laughing, but her voice trembled just enough to betray her. I took a deep breath, forcing the rage into focus. "Stop lying, Layla. I have proof. I know how you've manipulated Mom and Dad, how you've excluded me and Ethan from events, how you've twisted everything to make it seem like it's my choice. And I know about the trust fund plans, the letters, everything you've been hiding for years. Why? Why would you do this to your own sister?" She looked at me, her face a mixture of defiance and guilt, and for the first time I saw the human side of her, the insecurity, the fear of being less than perfect, the desperate need for control. Her voice softened, almost whispering, "Amara, I never wanted to hurt you. I've always been scared that people would think I'm not enough, that I'd be overshadowed. I wanted to protect Miles, to protect myself. I didn't know it would hurt you this much." I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Relief because she finally admitted the truth, and disbelief because for years I had been sidelined, excluded, and humiliated, and now it all came down to fear. Fear had driven her cruelty. The conversation quickly turned raw, emotional, and honest. I shared my feelings of invisibility, the lifelong pattern of exclusion, the subtle humiliations, the way her actions had affected my confidence as a mother, as a sister, as a woman. I told her about the message she sent, the social media post, and how it had made me feel invisible and unworthy. She listened, tears streaming down her cheeks, finally seeing the real impact of her actions beyond the image she had crafted. "I had no idea," she said softly. I thought you would understand. I thought you'd know I never meant for Ethan to feel unwelcome. I thought I was protecting everyone in my own way." But protection, I realized, was never her true motive. It had been control. Control over perception, control over family loyalty, control over power dynamics. And now, finally, the truth was on the table. We talked for hours, going through each family event, each manipulation, each moment of exclusion. There were tears, apologies, anger, and occasional laughter as we remembered happier, innocent times. I realized that underneath her jealousy, fear, and manipulation, Layla was still my sister, still human, still capable of change if she chose it. And I realized something else. My own anger, while justified, had been eating at me, keeping me stuck in the past, keeping me from healing. By the end of the conversation, we had reached a fragile understanding. Layla admitted she would step back from controlling events, that she would apologize to our parents, and that she would make amends with Ethan in a way that honored his importance. I set clear boundaries, no more manipulation, no more exclusion, and absolute honesty going forward. I told her that trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, and she agreed, finally recognizing the damage she had caused. The next step was addressing our parents. With Tasha's support, I shared the evidence of Layla's manipulation and deception. There were difficult conversations, tears, and moments of disbelief, but eventually they acknowledged the reality. Our family dynamics had been skewed, unfair, and damaging, and they vowed to honor boundaries, recognize both children equally, and ensure that Ethan would never feel invisible in his own family. That validation was a balm to my soul, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of justice and peace settling over me. Healing didn't happen overnight, of course. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and lingering resentment. But over time, with consistent honesty, therapy, and conscious efforts to rebuild trust, our relationship slowly transformed. Layla learned to recognize her patterns, I learned to assert myself without fear, and Ethan began to experience a family environment where his worth was visible and celebrated. I even watched Layla take small steps toward genuine humility and reconciliation, realizing that human change, while slow, was possible. In the months that followed, I focused on my own growth. I pursued new personal and professional goals, strengthened my friendships, and nurtured Ethan's confidence, ensuring he knew his value wasn't determined by anyone else's opinion. I practiced self-care, reflection, and forgiveness, not for Layla alone, but for myself. Letting go of past pain allowed me to reclaim power I didn't even realize I had lost. The final moments of closure came at Ethan's next big milestone, a small school recital where parents were invited. I watched him take the stage, his little hands holding the microphone, his face lighting up with pride and excitement. For the first time, I felt no fear of comparison, no need for validation from anyone but my own heart. And I saw Layla in the audience, genuinely smiling, her demeanor softer, no longer seeking control, simply witnessing a moment of joy she hadn't been able to steal or manipulate. That moment, quiet and simple, was triumph in its purest form. As I held Ethan afterwards, whispering words of love and encouragement, I realized that betrayal, manipulation, and exclusion had tested us, but they hadn't broken us. They had revealed truths, demanded accountability, and ultimately strengthened the bond between mother and child, sister and sister, and even the family as a whole. Life, I understood, wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about navigating it with courage, setting boundaries, and allowing growth and healing to emerge from the ashes of betrayal. And as I reflected on the journey, I asked myself, and now I ask you, the viewer, what have you allowed others to define for you? How many moments of your life have been overshadowed by someone else's need for control or recognition? Healing comes when you recognize your worth, reclaim your narrative, and refuse to be silenced by the cruelty or manipulation of others. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this? Has someone you trusted manipulated your life, excluded you, or diminished your worth? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you found your strength, your voice, and your path to healing. Because if there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that even in the darkest moments, we can find light, reclaim our power, and create a life defined not by others' cruelty, but by our own courage, love, and resilience.